Scott, thanks so much for jumping on.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Shane.
I really enjoyed our first time. I think first time you were on the podcast was a couple of years ago, and
hmm
I was really excited to have you back to because a lot has changed, right? Like back then, there was no chat GBT. There was none of that stuff was happening. Really keen to hear from you what you see when it comes to the market in terms of market trends. You have obviously a lot of experience in the go-to-market space, in the sales and marketing world, in the technology space. I'd love to start exploring what are some of those big trends that you're seeing in the market that maybe not everybody is seeing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the big trend that I'm thinking about right now is that in today's market, it's harder than ever to get your buyer's attention. And that is sort of the backdrop or the context for how I think about go to market today. I think a lot of people are familiar with this idea called attention scarcity. And attention scarcity is the idea that your buyer, your market, your customer, what your audience, whatever you want to call it, they have a finite amount of attention to give you every day. You are essentially competing for that attention as a go-to-market professional with a variety of different things, right? So like one thing you're competing against for that attention is all the news and information and content and media that exists out there in today's kind of information slash media landscape, right? And some of that is, professional information and knowledge, right? But some of that's consumer information and knowledge. So you are literally, as like a B2B marketer competing against, say, a TikTok or something like that for the buyer's attention. The second thing that sort of clutters the market and makes it really noisy is just how busy professionals are with their day-to-day work. And just think about, the number of tools that these professionals are using, the number of Slack notifications that they get, the number of emails that they receive every day. And then the third thing you're competing against with is, of course, your competitors, right? This is like more like directly competitive. But, in the sales tech space, for example, I think the last time I checked, G2 for how many different vendors were in the sales tech space, I think there were over 800 different vendors, in different G2 categories that you would consider sales tech. So there's a lot of competition out there, again, competing for this same finite amount of attention that, a buyer or our audience has to give to us. And so to me, like that is, the field that we're playing on, if you will. And what that means, there are other things that are happening, of course, but what that means is that you have to find ways to kind of break through the noise, interrupt the market, and get your buyer's attention. And I think there are some really interesting things happening in that regard today, right? Like some go to market professionals have gotten very creative there, and we can learn a lot from them. Some have not. Some are still running these old playbooks that are really having a tough time kind of breaking through the noise. By the way, the other thing, I think the way most of your guests would probably answer that question is AI, right? Well,
Yes.
AI is a thing, of course, and it contributes to that noise and that attention scarcity problem. Because if you can imagine that, those three things that I laid out, right? There's all this noise and information in the market. Professionals are busy now with lots of tools and just their day to day job. And there are lots of competitive vendors and products out there competing for that finite amount of attention. AI exacerbates all three of those things, right? Makes it easier to build products. So there's more competition. AI makes it easier to create more in the workforce. So you get more notifications and emails and that type of stuff because people are being more productive. And AI, of course, makes it easier to create lots of new content and media and things like that. So there's more content, media, and information out there. So I didn't want you to think I was like ignoring the elephant in the room. I'm acutely aware of it, just trying to give you a slightly different answer and help people think about like, no, what is this landscape or this environment that we're all operating in today?
What do you think that means for the large tech companies? A little while back, there was obviously articles coming out of organizations moving away from Salesforce and Workday and building their own platforms internally because it's a lot easier now. And I had the CMO of Salesforce for ANZ on the podcast, and he had a very interesting take on it. But what are your thoughts on how is that landscape going to change for them? There's obviously the picture from how it's changing across the board, across the entirety of the market. There's a lens of like, what does that mean for startups? What do you think this means for the big technology firms specifically?
Yeah. I think a few things. One is I think this idea that people are all of a sudden writing their own CRM, um, and ripping out Salesforce, or writing their own payroll processing or module or whatever, and ripping out Workday or whatever it is. I think that's probably pretty overblown. I think there are pockets, places in the market where that is happening, right? Like maybe you're a very early stage startup. Maybe there's a sales rep who has built a little tool to do something for them, right? And that maybe they would have used Salesforce for a while ago. But this idea that like organizations across the board are like ripping out Salesforce or whatever it is wholesale, I think that's quite rare. I haven't seen much evidence that that's truly happening. Having said that, I think over a long enough horizon, that could happen, right? Like that could happen, over the next 5 to 10 years. And so if I'm a large incumbent tech vendor, what are the things that I'm thinking about? Well, one thing I'm definitely thinking about is I'm thinking about my installed base of customers and doing whatever I have to do to retain those customers. Net new customer acquisition, super important, no doubt. But I have to defend the home base. I have to defend my installed base of customers. And I think the nature of systems of record software, so things like CRM software or ERP software or HR software, really lend themselves to that. Those things are extremely hard to rip out and replace.
They're very sticky.
They're very, very sticky. There's a ton of lock in there. By the way, I don't think that's necessarily because the vendors are doing anything malicious there. It's just the nature of the software. Like replacing one of those things is like open heart surgery, right? Those systems are very different than other types of systems, right? Like in the go-to-market tech space, you might compare a CRM to like a sales engagement tool. Sales engagement tool is probably a lot easier to rip out than your CRM. I think these large incumbent vendors should be focused on retaining their existing customers. I think they should be incredibly focused on building remarkable brands. And there's a lot to that, but basically you want to be known as a vendor that can be trusted in the market, a vendor that's extremely durable, that's going to do whatever it takes to take care of its customers. And then I also think you need to figure out a way to show that you're innovative. And that'll probably be the trickiest one for the large incumbent vendors, right? Like these startups in the AI space, I mean, sure, you can criticize them all you want. They are incredibly innovative. I mean, this is like a new generation of entrepreneurs and founders that are building these companies. They're very good at what they do. They're very innovative, both in terms of product and how they go to market. So you've got to fight that off a little bit as an incumbent vendor and be innovative yourself. And to be totally honest, I look across the large incumbents. I haven't seen a lot of like true innovation, even with all the AI stuff. I've seen them
Yeah.
like, sort of bolt AI capabilities onto their
A lot of
products.
marketing work is going in there for sure.
There's a lot of marketing, but I find that marketing to kind of be like the old playbook. It's not like what some of the new startups are doing with their marketing. And if I were running go to market at one of the incumbent vendors, I would be studying very, very closely what's this new breed of startups are doing to go to market, not just what they're building on the product side.
I definitely want to get into that. I also know that you work on a 10 pillar framework when it comes to GTM. Now, I don't know how these connect, and I'd love to explore that with you. I'd love to hear the old playbook. What are you seeing in the new playbook? And I'm really keen to get your thoughts because for audience that might not know, you do a lot of advising for some of the AI companies out there and some of the younger startup organizations. What does the new trend of GTM look like? What are some of the new tactics or strategies that are being implemented?
We probably don't have time to get into all 10. So I'll just pick let me see if I can pick a few themes that kind of span these 10 different disciplines or pillars that I work with my founder clients on. And as I go through some of these examples, just remember my clients are typically founders at early stage AI companies. They have technical backgrounds. They don't know a lot about go to market, and they basically bring me in to help kind of stand up the first iteration of their go to market function. So it's early stage, and we're building, I'm trying to help people who don't have a lot of go to market experience. And you might think, well, that's not really relevant for, a big company. I actually think it really is, right? Because we're sort of like unconstrained when we're talking about these early stage AI companies. We can build whatever we want. We're just trying to build something that works.
I want to clarify for anyone who's listening who might not know you. I mean, you've started multiple successive companies. You sold last company to Gartner, right? So I just want to point that
Yeah.
out to listeners that this is there's definitely some. I'm looking forward to the gold.
All right. All right. Well, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, my previous business was a company called Topo. It was a research advisory business like a Gartner. It's just we didn't do anything to help the IT organization. Everything we did was designed to help sales and marketing. And so we would study what the world's fastest growing companies were doing. And some of them were quite big, right? Like we'd go look inside of ServiceNow, for example, and try to figure out like, what are they doing in marketing? What are they doing in sales dev, in sales, et cetera? And we'd get really detailed and granular with them. So yes, I do have some experience working with larger companies on how they go to market. What I do today is with these early stage founders. And again, I think one way to think about everything that I'm about to share is like, no, this is like unconstrained. Like Scott and his founders are able to work together, starting with like literally a blank slate. And the place that we usually start is kind of where we started this podcast, which is, we start with the idea that if you're an early stage startup, you have to go get the market's attention. And that is really, really hard to do. And so, you're competing against these large incumbents. There's all this noise in the market, et cetera. And so, how do you go get that attention? Well, then the next thing we think about is like, what do you have as an early stage startup that you can bring to bear on the market, right? Well, you don't have a big budget. You don't have a big team. You don't have a big brand, right? Like you don't have a lot of things, but you do have a few things that are really, really valuable. One thing you have is you have a founder, right? And that founder is able to do things in the market that a salesperson can't, a CMO can't, right? A big marketing budget can't. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about like, what can a founder do? The other thing that I find with these early stage AI startups is they are able to think in like really creative ways that a large incumbent might not be able to. And so I'll just give you a couple of examples. So when it comes to things that the founder can do that like other people can't, we see a lot of people focused on this idea of the founder brand today. And I do a lot of work with my CEOs on that. We treat the founder brand as more than just posting on LinkedIn. That's part of it, right? But we also work on things like, what's your strategic narrative? Like, what's the story that you, as the founder, are going to go tell the market? Yeah, we're going to publish that on LinkedIn. We're going to manifest that story via lots of posts on LinkedIn, but then we're also going to go manifest it in other places. Maybe we're going to create a podcast that allows the founder to tell his or her story directly to the market. Maybe we're going to make sure that the founder is regularly speaking at industry events or hosting local dinners for members of the community that are in his or her marketplace. So we really treat the founder brand thing as a holistic effort that involves like a strategic narrative and then not just LinkedIn, but multiple channels that you use to spread that narrative into the market. And your objective there is not to get a bunch of impressions or likes on LinkedIn. It is for the founder's name to become synonymous with the market And by virtue of doing that, to make their company synonymous with the market. It's almost like category ownership or leadership, right? And so the example I give here of someone who's been successful with this is not these people that you see on LinkedIn going viral and like being really cringy and like rage baiting people and engagement farming. The example I give here is Nick Mehta at Gainsight, right? Like Nick was the founder and CEO of Gainsight. He went out and made himself synonymous with the customer success movement. And in the process of doing that, attached Gainsight to that movement, and Gainsight ended up owning that market. Founder brand is one thing that I think is like really interesting right now. A lot of people talk about it. I think a lot of people think about it the wrong way. They think about it as like, well, I post on LinkedIn. And you're really doing yourself a disservice if that's how you think about it. The second example is, okay, in my opinion, these early stage startups and AI startups in particular are able to think in like these creative ways that I just don't see with the big incumbent vendors. I sort of call it, I tell all the founders I work with, like you need to think a part of your job as like, I am Mr. Beast for B2B technology or SaaS or AI. And my job is to, yes, deliver value to my customers, but it's also to engage them and entertain them and offer them things that are fun and unique and would cause them to want to spend time with me. And this is like hard for some people, right? You know, but it actually is very effective and works really well. And my favorite example of this is a company that a lot of people talk about now, but it's Lovable. And, you know, the founder at Lovable just has a knack for running these kind of like growth experiments, I would call them. And it's just like this constant stream of marketing things that they are doing in the market to get the market's attention. My favorite examples now, I think like year and a half, a couple years old, but Lovable did this thing where they had it was like a design competition and they streamed it live online. And the competition was between a traditional web designer who was going to use all the traditional web design tools to design some type of app. That was competitor one. Competitor two was someone who had no design experience, and they were going to use Lovable to design the same app. And I think they had like an hour or something to do it, and they live streamed this thing. The traditional designer won, but the reaction that the audience had was like, wow, this is actually really cool. Like Lovable, it's not perfect, but it's like super powerful. This person with no design experience was able to create a prototype in like minutes, right? It was very cool. That's not the point though. The point is, I think 40,000 people tuned into the live stream, and
Wow.
then 3 million people watched the archived version. And it's just an example. It's not like the greatest breakthrough ever.
Yeah, but those are big numbers in the B2B world.
Those are big numbers, right? And this is like a little startup with no marketing budget. This is before Lovable was like super hot and had raised all this money at a multi-billion-dollar valuation, right? It's like a few people. Other things Lovable has done is like the company's called Lovable. Well, what day did they launch the company on? Valentine's Day, right? I
Valentine's
mean,
Day.
they're just constantly thinking of this type of stuff that, again, I think of it as like Mr. Beast for SaaS or for AI or whatever you want to call it. And you got to have some of that. And so both those examples are about getting the market's attention. And those are actually two of the pillars that I work on with my clients. One's founder brand, the other is this idea of growth experiments or Mr. Beast for SaaS. And but that idea of like getting the market's attention spans a lot of the different pillars. The idea of like the founder having an unfair advantage, right? And sort of these superpowers in the realm of go to market, I think is another kind of theme that spans most of the pillars. And I think both of those things are like directly applicable to even if you're a larger vendor, right? Like I look at what, Mark Benioff has done at Salesforce. huge vendor, but you still think of Mark, right? Like, I mean, you still think of him as the company, right? OpenAI is more of a startup, right? But I look at some of the creative things that they've done on the go-to-market side. It's really impressive. So some of these lessons do apply to larger vendors as well.
If we were going to take one more pillar, what do you think we can touch on? I'm keen to hear about customer feedback. And I asked this because, I mean, at our agency, we work with a lot of B2B tech. And usually the companies that we work with, they're HQ in the US and they have a office in APAC, whether that's in Singapore or Australia or somewhere in the region. The message don't necessarily always work the same, right? Because the market maturity is at a different stage. And we've had this experience, for example, with one of our clients where this region was the first region to roll out an AI message for enterprise organizations. And you go out to market and then the companies are like, yeah, we're not there. We're like, this is look, we have like 3 more steps to get to what you guys are talking about. Right. But in the US, it was having amazing success. Right. So I'm keen to hear if there's an element there that you work on or you've seen some interesting stuff with regards to customer feedback and kind of looping that into the go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that is not the pillar I would have picked, but that is the most important pillar. We can talk about the pillar I would have picked, which
Okay,
which
all right.
which I call which I call manufacturing moments, but that's we'll do that if we have time. Let's talk about customer feedback and the way that I talk about this with my clients is basically your job in go to market, particularly early stage companies, is to build the tightest customer feedback loops possible. That's your job. Yeah, you're supposed to win customers and deals and generate revenue and that type of stuff. But if you really think about what you're trying to do as an early stage company, you're trying to collect feedback from the market and then improve all aspects of your business based on that feedback and then take the improved version of that part of your business back into the market, collect more feedback and keep going and going and going. And the idea is you need those loops to be as tight as possible. AI makes it possible for those loops to be really tight. We'll talk about that in a second. I first heard about this idea. I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was Mark Andreessen, but it was someone smart like that. I've never been able to find the quote, and I've tried a bunch. But it was a quote that was like, the company with the tightest feedback loops wins. And that is absolutely true in technology markets. That is 100% true. Particularly if you're a startup trying to disrupt an incumbent. Like if you have tight feedback loops, you have a chance to beat the incumbent. Okay, so what does a tight feedback loop mean? Well, basically it means a customer or a prospect, someone in the market, in your target market, preferably with ICP fit, they give you a piece of feedback. You can collect that feedback in different places in different ways. You can collect it via conversations, via meetings, via a quick hallway conversation or booth conversation that happens at an event, an email that you get, a comment on LinkedIn. There's so many different ways to collect these customer insights. So your job is to collect those and then to analyze them and then to route them to the right place in the organization. Now you're focused on go to market, but and so am I. But think about these feedback loops and this customer feedback as being the foundation of optimizing lots of different parts of your business, and just to simplify, we could think of that as go to market and we can think of that as product, right? And so basically, you want to take that feedback and make product decisions based on it. You want to make go to market decisions based on it as well. You brought up messaging.
Mm.
Messaging is a great example of something that you would want to optimize based on feedback that you're getting from the market. Another thing you might want to optimize in the go to market part of your organization based on customer feedback is what I call offers. Those are the things that you offer your customer to get them to engage with you, right? It could be a workshop, it could be a free trial. You can also do things like optimize pricing and so forth. But the idea is you make that optimization and then you quickly get it back into the market. right? You don't sit on it, you don't wait, you push it back into the market. And what you're trying to do here, is basically, you know, feedback loop after feedback loop. These things are constantly running, and you stack enough of these loops on top of each other over the course of a year or 5 years or 10 years, and you end up with a much stronger go to market function, a much better product as a result of that. And the tighter you can make those loops, the faster you can iterate, right? Imagine these loops are happening weekly instead of quarterly. That is a significant advantage for any company. AI makes that possible, right? So if you just take like the call recording sliver of the go to market tech stack, where you have basically an infinite number of options, right? You can now ingest all of these conversations that are happening in
Yeah.
Zoom, Google Meet, whatever it is, and analyze those things for valuable feedback, right? And feed that feedback into the right parts of your organization. There are even tools out there now where sales reps on a trade show floor can have an app open on their phone that allows them to record any conversation that they have in the booth. Those conversation notes get uploaded to the CRM, where again, they can be routed to the appropriate places in the org. Now, how many companies are really doing this at scale? Probably zero, right? But the idea is that we should all be building these tight customer feedback loops. Again, I work with early stage startups where we're starting from scratch. The first pillar we work on is like, hey, what we're ultimately building here is a feedback loop. Yep, we want to close business, close deals, but like what we're really interested in is taking customer feedback in, making our product and go to market function better, and pushing that improved version of not only the product, but the go to market function back into the market as soon as possible.
Have you played around or have any thoughts on this synthetic customer research stuff that are coming out, like Evidenza? There's a lot of noise in that space as well, that you can create these synthetic audiences and do market research and have pretty much the same kind of feedback that that your market research would get. Again, I don't know if you've kind of looked into them or come across them much.
I have not, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And even though I don't know a lot about this, I'll still offer my opinion. Um, which is
Let's do it.
I mean it's a podcast, why not? I guess my gut reaction to that, and I'm open to being proven wrong on this, of course. My gut reaction to that is, okay, sounds interesting. You should probably do it. It's probably like a table stakes type thing. But I would want to know two things. One is like, how well is the underlying model trained in, my specific market, buyer personas, accounts? Like, how well does it understand that world? A lot of that knowledge, in my experience, is very arcane. It's not, at least not yet, it's not encapsulated in, any of the underlying foundation models, right? I spend a lot of time with the models, and you know, they can tell me the obvious things about this type of buyer in the oil and gas industry, but it doesn't tell me the non-obvious things, right? That a really good salesperson, for example, would know. So that would be one question I would have. The second question I have, which is kind of related, is like, well, how innovative can a tool like that be? Because remember, the work that I do with my clients starts with the premise that we have to do something very innovative and creative in our go to market org to
To
interrupt
stand
the
out.
market. Yeah, to stand out. And so can an LLM tell me that? Can one of these tools really tell me that? Can it have like a breakthrough event for me where I'm like, "Oh man, I know exactly what I'm going to do to reach buyers at mid-sized oil and gas companies. Like, this is super innovative and creative." LLMs aren't really good at that yet. They're good at,
Mm.
I would say, rehashing and kind of synthesizing existing knowledge and information, but they're not really good yet at having like breakthrough moments. And that's what I'm looking for when it comes to go to market. It's like, what are our breakthrough moments going to be? And they don't have to be home runs. They could just be like, small things, but they're new and innovative, and they do get the market's attention.
The table
So
stake don't move the needle. No, that's I
maybe
appreciate that.
I don't know. It sounds super interesting. I'm going to go check them out. Those are just two questions that I would have.
I want to talk about manufacturing moments. Let's talk about that. I'm very excited. Tell us about that. What is that?
Yeah, so manufacturing moments is this idea that like one way to break through all the noise in the market is to create a moment that generates a lot of attention for you and your product. And the classic example of this is actually Salesforce, right? And it's Mark Benioff circa 1999, 2000. He's basically, just starting Salesforce, and he's trying to figure out a way to kind of insert the company into the conversation that is happening in the market. And back then it was like, enterprise software, the CRM market was dominated by a company called Siebel. Siebel, at the peak of the dot-com bubble, I think had a $30 billion market cap. It was the clear market leader, but it was not a SaaS application. It was an on-prem solution, right? You bought the software, you paid up front, you implemented the software, you hired a firm called Anderson Consulting, which is now called Accenture, to come in and spend like 2 years like implementing the software. Everyone hated it. It cost millions of dollars in licensing fees, and then, $5 million to actually implement the software. Then, you ran it on your own servers. So like if you wanted to upgrade the software, Siebel would like ship you a CD. It was just like crazy. And so Benioff, a lot of people were talking about, back then they were called application service providers, ASPs. It wasn't even called SaaS. And Benioff wasn't the first person to think about this stuff, but he had built this SaaS CRM product that was meant to compete against Siebel. And I think he's in like some apartment in North Beach in San Francisco. He doesn't even have like a real office, right? I mean, it's like truly like grimy startup stuff. But he comes up with this idea, which is Siebel is having their user conference at Moscone Center in San Francisco. All the enterprise software buyers are going to be there. It's kind of like Mecca for enterprise software. What Dreamforce is today, the Siebel user conference was back then. And so Benioff basically decides to stage a fake protest at the Siebel user conference. He hires all these actors to carry picket signs around that say, no software, with the red line and circle. Kind of looks like the Ghostbusters logo. He even hires a bunch of actors to play a news crew to come in and interview the protesters. Siebel figures out what's going on, so they try and kick them out and like block them and everything, which totally backfires because now they've picked a fight with this little ant in the market. And it's just became a thing where Benioff became, and Salesforce became known for this no software or end of software, what ultimately became a movement and became the SaaS industry. He did it at their user conference in Cannes, and in that example, he took over all the taxis in Nice. Everyone would fly into the Nice airport and have to take a taxi to the Siebel conference in Cannes, but they were riding in cabs that had been completely branded as Salesforce with the no software thing. I think even I've heard that even the taxi drivers have been trained on like Salesforce sound bites. And so he just manufactured this moment, which became the no software moment. And if you're, I'm older, if you were working in Silicon Valley back then, which I was, everyone knew about this. Everyone knew about it. It was a moment that Benioff manufactured. And it's a great example of, I guess people 10, 15 years ago would have called it like guerrilla marketing or something like that. But I think of it as like manufacturing and owning this moment that really interrupts the market. The most obvious example nowadays is what people call a direct launch, right? Where you launch your startup and you kind of do you go direct, right? Like the founders talking to the market via Twitter X, LinkedIn, going on pod. There's no PR agency. Yeah, maybe you go to the Wall Street Journal, but if they don't pick it up, you don't care because you've gone direct to the market
Mm.
with your launch. And that's the most common example of manufacturing and owning these moments. And it's just another example of interrupting the market.
Are there any companies that are on your radar right now that you are closely looking at in terms of what are they doing with when it comes to GTM?
If I think about some of these things that we've talked about, in terms of the pillars. So we've talked about founder brand, we've talked about growth experiments, we've talked about manufacturing moments. So, we've talked about strategic narratives, right? So let me just see if I can think off the top of my head of some companies that have done, a good job in some of those areas. So let's start with strategic narrative because I think that's really important. That's another thing that's like foundational and spans so much of your go to market, right? You can be running the best go to market tactics in the world. If you don't have a good, compelling strategic narrative that sort of underpins all of these tactics, the tactics don't really matter,
Mm,
like
it fell
what's
flat.
the point of having a great landing page if like the story that you're telling on the landing page doesn't resonate, right? So my favorite example, this is actually a company that's been around for a little bit. They're now publicly traded. They have, a huge company, multi-billion dollar market cap. My favorite example of a company that just absolutely nailed their strategic narrative is ServiceTitan. And ServiceTitan is here in the States. They're headquartered down in the LA area. Basically what they do is it's vertical SaaS. It's a SaaS application for what in the States we call the trades. And the trades are things like HVAC repair people, electricians, plumbers, those types of people. Well, the two founders of ServiceTitan, both of their fathers worked in the trades. And the way ServiceTitan and those founders sort of crafted the ServiceTitan story is like, hey, the trades, they literally say that. I think this is what exactly how they say that. The trades stand frozen in time. And the idea is that, most tradespeople, right? They go to work, they complete the job, they come home at night, maybe they send out some invoices off of, Google, they're using Google Docs to send out invoices. Maybe they got a couple voicemails, they try and reply to those, and they're up until like 10 at night trying to run their business. And it's really freaking hard. And then they get up the next morning, they go back into the field, they do the jobs, and they come home the next night and do the same thing. And this is this idea of like the trades stand frozen in time. And so that was one part of the story. The other part of the story was that ServiceTitan had this vision of the future where it didn't have to be that way, right? Like there was this way to run these businesses that would be like running a modern business, right? Just so happens ServiceTitan built a piece of software that allowed you to run your business that way. The product is secondary though, right? The main message is like, no, there's this future state that we're going to help the trades get to, right? Another part of
Mm.
the story is that these tradespeople, they're the heroes, not ServiceTitan. ServiceTitan's like a guide that kind of helps these heroes on their journey from the status quo to the future. And then another incredible part of the story, and not everyone could do this. I mean, it was literally in their blood, right? Like both their fathers had worked in the trades. It was personal for them, right? It was like a personal journey. The story was like really personal. So this ServiceTitan narrative, it's, I think it's, I don't hear many people talk about it. It is by far and away the best B2B narrative I've ever heard. It just like checks
Really?
all the
Wow.
boxes. Yeah, like major transformation story, accurately describing the customer's pain, and it's personal, right? It's not like, hey, we went out and surveyed 100 tradespeople and they told us this is their pain. They were like, no, we watched our dads
We
sit at the
lived it.
kitchen
Yeah.
table and like hand write invoices every night. So I don't know. That's like one of my favorite examples on strategic narrative. Founder brand. I think there are a lot of people doing good work on founder brand. I mentioned Nick Meta at Gainsight. He's no longer at Gainsight, but that doesn't matter. go look at what Nick did. Then there are a ton of people. Another way to answer your question is like, who's doing a bad job? There are a ton of people who are doing a really bad job on founder brand. They think they're doing a great job
Are we naming
because
names? Is that where
I'm
we're
not going to
going?
name
No.
names,
Okay.
but what I will say is like, everyone knows what cringe is on LinkedIn. And when you see founders being really cringy on LinkedIn, just use some common sense. You, as the founder, are doing way more damage to your brand and your business than you are good. But you don't know that because there's no thumbs down button on LinkedIn. There's only a thumbs up button or a heart button or whatever. And so you think, oh man, I got all these impressions. I got 100 likes, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, like 10,000 people just rolled their eyes at you. And that does, we should not underestimate this like LinkedIn cringe fest stuff that happens, the damage that can do to a brand. I look, some of the founders I work with, all of them. I run these workshops with them on each of the pillars, and I run a founder brand workshop, and I will put up content posts on LinkedIn from some of these founders, and I will ask people just react to this. And the leading founder brands on LinkedIn all 100% get negative reactions. No one gets this cringe slop stuff. No one reacts
I
positively
love
to
to
it.
see those
Yeah.
posts that you put in front of them.
You have to sign an NDA. So then we were talking about growth experiments and manufacturing moments. I'll put those two things together for now. I think Lovable does a great job with that stuff. We talked about that. There's some companies out there who like take that stuff way too far, right? These, there's a again, I'm not going to, I guess I can talk about Cluely because everyone knows about Cluely, right? But like Cluely's an example of trying to manufacture the moment, do a direct launch, and it really just kind of backfiring. I mean, the the negative brand equity that they created was quite an accomplishment, but it was negative brand equity. Cluely is an app that allegedly the way they launched is like they launched this with this video of this guy out on a date. He's basically got this heads up display. I think I'm getting this right. He's got this heads up display that's like telling him like what to say on the date. And it just came across as like, you know, very performative, not constructive, not good for society, right? But
Manipulative, yeah.
it was a huge launch. It was just perceived very, very negatively. And some of that's a consumer app, right? And I think they've since pivoted to something completely different. It's like a real-time note taker now or something like that. But you do see this in B2B as well. And I think what I see in B2B, there was a YC launch a few weeks ago. Funny enough, I don't even remember who it is. It got a ton of attention, this YC startup. And I would characterize everyone does these launch videos now, these early stage startups. And a lot of them have drifted into the world of like what I would call like performative nihilism. And what I mean by that is they're just launching to be performative, right? And they don't really believe anything or care about anything. It's just meant to be like funny or shocking or entertaining. And I'm in favor of some of those things within reason, right? You still have to deliver value to your customers. And it just seems like in this world of like manufacturing the moment and direct launches, a lot of I don't think this is an issue with bigger companies because they're like, there's adult leadership in the marketing organization. A lot of
There's
these
the brand red
yeah,
tapes.
yeah. But a lot of these early stage startups, it's just performative nihilism, right? Where it's like, they don't believe in anything. It's just a performance to get as much engagement, as many page views as you can. And then we'll figure out the rest later on down the road. I think it's really terrible and an example of something that you don't want to do. Again, an example where like there are no thumbs down buttons on social media, but if there were, you'd be getting absolutely destroyed. And like those 500 likes you got wouldn't be worth it at all.
Scott, just want to say this has been, as always, an amazing conversation, and I've taken a lot of notes, and I'm sure the listeners would be taking a lot of things home. So, just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast for the second time, and looking forward for the third.
All right. Well, great. Well, thanks for having me. And hopefully there's some new stuff in there that people haven't heard before. So
Absolutely. Thanks, Scott.
thanks, Shane. Good to see you.